All right, I will get us going. So welcome to today's coffee break. I'm Brandon Viroff. I serve on the Education Committee. We're excited to feature this networking opportunity with our Missouri Gateway chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council. Today, we have some members, maybe some non-members of our chapter, so thank you for joining us. I am going to do a personal plug today. Do you know of an emerging environmental leader in St. Louis? At the upcoming St. Louis Earth Day Festival, an emerging leader or young professional will be recognized for sparking change in our community. Nominations close today, April 1st. No fools. I'm not fooling around about this. The award will earn that individual a $500 prize. So I will put the link in the chat for you to go and nominate an individual. Okay, the goal for our coffee breaks are to provide an opportunity for our community to engage in conversations over a hot cup of coffee, or maybe just your, breakfast drink of choice over a short 30-minute break. Our theme for today's conversation is Better Than Net Zero from Day One, introducing climate-friendly snacking. Today, I'm excited to introduce our special guest, which is Jen McKnight. She's president and co-founder of Bright Future Foods, the maker of Airly climate-friendly snacks. Jen has spent over 20 years in consumer packaged goods, beginning her career at Procter & Gamble as a mechanical engineer. She went on to earn an MBA at Kellogg School of Management and enter a career in brand management, working at companies including Clorox, Premier Nutrition, and Campbell's, where she successfully led growth and innovation on a range of iconic brands across many categories. Jen passionately believes climate change is a colossal challenge that needs bold solutions now. That's why she made the decision to dedicate all her efforts towards driving innovative solutions to this threat. And you'll learn more a little bit in her talk today. So just some general guidelines for everyone. The option to click the grid view up in the right-hand corner to include more callers. The chat function is accessed at the bottom for anybody who wants to chat. Please try to be respectful of others. Allow others to join in the conversation. And try to keep yourself muted unless speaking to avoid any background noise, but be mindful not to jump over anyone else who's speaking, but feel free to talk through without being called upon. You don't necessarily need, it's supposed to be very conversational, but if you do have something to say and you want to add to the conversation, just use one of the reaction buttons or raise your hand and I'll try to get you into the conversation. Without further ado, Jen.
Brandon, good morning, everybody. It's an honor to talk to fellow St. Louisans and Missourians who are focused on environmental sustainability. And while you're focused on the buildings that we live in and work in, I think I'm focused on the food we're eating. So Bright Future Foods and Airly is part of Post Holdings, which is based here in Brentwood, Missouri. I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing. So we really started this as a small core group. Rob Vitale, who's our CEO, hired us and challenged us with go disrupt food and beverage. Like, this is an industry that's ready for disruption. My co-founders and I really wanted to focus on how could we use food to be part of the solution for climate change. And we really kind of challenged ourselves with a question of what if instead of just trying to be less bad, could we actually create a food that fundamentally removes greenhouse gas from the air? Because while the energy sector tends to get all the focus in terms of, biggest portion of greenhouse gas emissions, food actually has a really important role to play. Depending on which study you look at, it's responsible for somewhere between 25 to 35% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we really started with our mission. It's like, how do we use food to help reverse climate change? So that's where we started it all. Ultimately, what we ended up exploring was, thanks to new technologies in big data and in agricultural tech, for the very first time, we're able to actually measure the amount of carbon that farmers can sequester on field and actually reward farmers for investing in the type of historical regenerative practices that enable not only more healthy soil, but also more carbon sequestration on farm. So that's kind of where we started the whole thing. And ultimately, last year, we launched with the world's first climate positive snack. So with Airly, and hopefully everybody's had a chance, go check it out at your local Schnucks. We launched a line of crackers that aren't just, less bad. Every single box we sell removes greenhouse gas from the air. And, as we were really thinking about how do we create this product, there were a few things that we reflected on. So this is fundamentally a huge unmet consumer need. So all the studies will tell you that consumers want to vote with their values, and certainly want to be part of the solution. But then you juxtapose that with today, fewer than 1 in 5 Americans can name a sustainable brand. And really, once you pull Patagonia out of the mix, then they're really flummoxed to come up with one. So you can imagine that if you're creating a new company or a new brand, that's going to give you a bit of pause. So we spent some time really trying to think about what are we going to do differently so that we could actually tap into that unmet consumer need. So when we started Airly, even before we crafted our first cracker, we came up with kind of a hypothesis for 3 things we had to do differently or we had to get right if we really wanted to own this kind of climate positive or climate friendly positioning with the consumer. And the first one, not by accident, is we fundamentally cannot ask the consumer to trade off. So when we decided to go into snacking and develop Airly, the very first consideration that we had was we know that consumers want to vote with their values, but fundamentally that's in my decision choice set, but it's never going to, for most people, not going to supersede. It's got to taste amazing. It's got to be at a great value, and it's got to be convenient. So that's really why we decided to go into crackers. It's a big category. People are familiar with it. And when we designed it, we actually did all of our taste testing versus the big guys, and we designed it to be priced in line with the big guys. So that's kind of thing we're doing differently. Number one is not requiring any kind of trade-offs. Second thing we're doing differently is we actually designed it from day one to be a climate positive food brand. So the reason it's called Airly is because it removes greenhouse gas from the air. The reason the crackers are shaped like clouds is we want to remind you that we remove greenhouse gases from the air. So in all of our communications and in our product, we actually designed it very much to be climate forward in our DNA from day one. And then the third thing that I have on here, and I don't know if you spend much time listening to marketers in the consumer packaged goods space, but make it personal, make it real is something we all say, and it sounds trite. What I really mean by that is within the climate change space, one of the key consumer insights when you really talk to folks is that, it's big, it's scary. I don't think I, as an individual, can make a difference. I'm looking to big government, I'm looking to big business, but this problem is so huge, I don't see how what I do makes a difference. And so one of the things that we did with Airly was we very deliberately put our impact right on the back of every single pack. So for those who are familiar with Tom's Shoes, when they launched their shoe brand, they launched with this idea of buy one, give one. Well, every time you buy a pair of Tom's shoes, a child in South America gets a pair of shoes. That's incredibly telegraphic. So I know what the impact of my choice of buying that pair of shoes is. We were trying to make food that simple, that telegraphic. So on the back of every single one of our packs, we put our carbon footprint. So this happens to be our cheddar cracker, and you'll see that this box that you're holding in your hand, usually I have one sitting here. This box that you have sitting in your hand just removed 21 grams of CO2 from the air. And because most people have no idea what that means, we tried to make it a little bit more approachable, a little bit more relevant. And so we equivalize that to you just cleaned enough air to fill 2,900 beach balls. So as we tell our story, we try to make it as simple as possible. What makes it different? We're removing greenhouse gas. What does that mean? Like you personally today, not in the future, not some, distant 2050. You today just removed 21 grams of CO2. And then how we do that. So I talked a little bit about how we farm differently. We engage carbon farming techniques. So that's no-till, that's crop rotation, that's precision nitrogen management, all kind of the standard pieces that are within regenerative farming. But what we overlay with that is, and what really makes it true carbon farming is the actual precision. So we partnered with Colorado State University, Dr. Keith Palston, who was part of the Nobel Peace Prize winning group with Al Gore, world leader in how you actually measure the carbon that gets sequestered within the soil. As a marketer, I'll tell you, I had no appreciation for just the complexity of the biological system of soil. But we partnered with them. So we do all of the regenerative practices, but above and beyond that, we work with their organization to do biogeospatial modeling and measurement so we can identify the fields that have the best potential to remove the most CO2 possible. We bring those experts at Colorado State University directly into conversation with our growers and with our millers. And then the most important piece of all is we validate that through a full on-farm life cycle assessment. So looking at the entire farm practices and our specific contribution within what we're growing. And then for us, and we weren't quite sure if we were going to be able to do this, but our goal was we have to be negative on the farm. So we were able to actually prove that out in year one. In harvest one, we were able to go negative with oats. In harvest two, we were able to go negative with oats and wheat. We have a few more grains that this year we anticipate are also going to go negative. We do that math. So in the case of cheddar, we are removing 21 grams of CO2 from the air on the farm. Now, we're continuing to work on the rest of our supply chain. So today, nobody has zero emissions baking, but actually we've identified some technology that will enable us to do no emission baking here in the US. We're looking at transportation. We're looking at all of our other ingredients. We're looking at our packaging, every single step from seed to shelf. And then today, there's no way to get it to zero, although we're working towards zero. So to get us back to that on-farm level of negative 21 grams, we do our full product life cycle assessment and then invest in additional agricultural projects and forestry projects to get us back to that on-farm level. So fundamentally how we do it, we farm differently. We invest in the carbon credits to offset the rest of the process. And then the third pillar of the how story for us is continue to innovate. So I think one of the challenges, and you probably see this a lot in the organizations that you're in, is that there's so much debate over, the regulations and is this the right process or that the right process. One of the things that we aligned to early on is a core value for us is the time to act is now. So why you see that, in this pillar is, we haven't identified how to completely get to zero emission transportation. And gosh, if I waited until I could get to that before I launched this, we would not have crackers out there. So that's the third pillar is we'll continue to innovate. So we want to be really clear with our consumer on where we are on our journey. And our commitment is every single year we're getting better. So we're reducing our carbon footprint on farm. We're sequestering more CO2 every single year, and we're reducing our emissions throughout the rest of the process every single year. So that's fundamentally the early proposition. It's really, both kind of an honor and a lot of fun to work for a new company starting up and doing this, because you see a lot of, the big guys out there. And when when you have 100-year-old company and all those facilities out there, and I appreciate the challenges of getting to net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050. But one of the kind of neat things we can say is from day one, we've been better than net zero. We have fundamentally removed more CO2 from the air than we have emitted all the way from day one, and we will always be in the net negative column. So it's been quite a journey just getting this up and off the ground. As you can imagine, trying to tell this story to the consumer about how you are sequestering more CO2 on the farm level with these unique techniques in the oats that are inside the cracker. And oh, by the way, it's fun and delicious and you'll love it. It's been kind of an interesting just communication challenge as we think about bringing the story to life. But that's kind of, the story of Airly and how we got here today. So, I'm assuming there will be a lot of questions, and I'm happy to talk more about, the carbon farming, about, the credits and how we put together a life cycle assessment that takes into account all the most conservative assumptions. And then on top of that, we overinvest in credits because, I talked about not letting perfection get in the way of progress. One of the ways that we, future-proof ourselves for that and ensure that we are never greenwashing and never putting anything on our pack or our website or anything that's not 100% true is that we always take the most conservative assumptions. And then above and beyond that, in the case of carbon credits, we didn't just invest in enough to cover our margin for error. We doubled it just so that if we learn anything in the future, we always have enough credits. We pre-buy them in advance so that when you pick up this box of crackers, the oats that are in there fundamentally did remove the greenhouse gas from the air. You can be proud that when you bought that, you fundamentally did make the air a little bit better. So I will pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions about how we made it, why we made it, what carbon farming looks like, or anything else the group's interested in.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions you'd like to ask?
I have a couple questions, actually, Jen. Thanks for your presentation. So one is like, where are the farms? I'm just kind of curious about that. But then the second is whether you've looked at the possibility of farming any kind of perennial crops. So instead of annual crops that have to be replanted every year, what are the options out there? Because we have a really good resource in the Land Institute, I think in Kansas, that does a lot of research on that. So just curious if that's come into play at all in the conversation.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So you would ask about farm location. So our wheat farms are in Michigan. They are, for all the Michigan folks on the phone right here. I know like people always do the hand thing. They're in the thumb of Michigan up by the Great Lakes. And then on the oat side, we have domestic in South Dakota. And then this year we added a few more up in Canada, which actually was a good thing given the drought that oats faced this year in South Dakota. And then in terms of types of crop, we're actually incredibly interested in perennials. I know Kernza gets a lot of attention. That's one we've been really engaging with and actually playing around with, what is that like as an ingredient within the product? It's interesting because one of the questions we've actually been asking, and the body of research is getting better and better, but because a lot of these cereal crops like oat, wheat, corn, soy, have such deep history. There's a lot of history in farming practices and a lot more data around like true carbon sequestration at the farm. In theory, the perennial actually should be better. It's just right now the USDA doesn't have quite as much to offer to validate. So it's one of the things we're super interested in and still kind of working with our partners at Colorado State and some of the other leading organizations to try to actually get that solid carbon footprint for. We also need yields to get up a little bit more on some of them because right now from a cost standpoint, it's challenged.
So I have a question. So the grocery stores are incredibly challenging to really get on their shelves. Okay. So how are you really able to make that pitch to like, hey, we have a product and we want you to put it on your shelves?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Brandon. And I'm not going to lie, it's hard in the best of times. It's been really interesting to launch a new brand in a new category you're not already in the middle of a global pandemic. Because just the access to buyers is a little bit more challenging than it has been in other places. Locally here, Snooks has been great to work with. I think, because we have kind of that hometown connection. As we've been talking with retailers, I think folks I shouldn't say intuitively, but we've had a lot of reactions. Most retailers understand this is the future of food. When you think about what your shopper's going to be expecting of you, I think most know that this is where the shopper's going to be at. I think one of our biggest challenges has been we're the first ones out there to do it. So as we make our pitch, we're talking with the retailers to educate them around what is carbon farming. I think regenerative farming is starting to become more and more, a higher awareness with buyers. But certainly the carbon farming piece is fairly new. And the other question a lot of times that I will ask retailers is, if I walk into your store today and I want to buy an environmentally friendly product, where do I go? And I think that's fundamentally the problem that we're trying to fix. I'm incredibly passionate about putting carbon footprints on products for a couple of reasons. One, consumers really do want to be part of the solution, but we're doing a terrible job at giving them information. Short of maybe I've heard that plant-based meat and dairy alternatives are better. And honestly, the jury's still out. There's still kind of work to be done because there's a lot of processing in those alternatives. So, I've heard those might be better, but short of that, I challenge you to walk into your local Walmart and go pick out something that's environmentally sustainable. So that's one reason why I'm incredibly passionate about putting the footprint on there, is it just helps the consumer, it helps the shopper select the things that they know they want to buy. The other reason I'm really passionate about it is it's kind of the put your money where your mouth is measurement. Now, there's a ton of debate, again, on which ISO process are you using. We can have all those debates, but in order for you to put your carbon footprint on pack, that means you've done a full product life cycle assessment. And even if you do nothing else than get that information, it gives you so much insight into what the impact of your product is. Because I can pull up my life cycle assessment and tell you exactly what % of my footprint is coming from my farm, what % is coming from my ingredients. I can tell you across every ingredient that's in our product which one has the highest footprint. And then I can go back to my dairy farmers and I can challenge them to work on their cheese and work on their butter. And the funny thing is, packaging gets so much attention because it's physical. I can see it. When you look at it through kind of the carbon, your carbon glasses, actually packaging is not a big piece of the footprint for us. Our big go-gets are really around transportation and some of our ingredients. And I think even just that insight into your product makes you a more conscientious manufacturer, and hopefully makes you want to go tackle the stuff that has the biggest, most important potential to impact. So that's why I'm really passionate about footprints, because it helps the consumer and it makes you put your money where your mouth is. There's no way to fake, well, there is a way, but you can't fake your way out of a footprint. You got to do the work.
Totally. So we do have a question from Louis. Louis, do you want to come off? Louise, you want to come off of mute?
Sure, thanks. I'm sorry, my camera is not working. My question is, how do you approach the farmers, especially here in our St. Louis area? I'm assuming that there is a lot of educating to do. And also the reference to the beach balls. I mean, we're talking about, reducing the carbon print, the footprint, and beach balls are not recyclable. I mean, they have the hardest plastic. Any other options? I know your packaging is done.
No, those are great questions. So from a farmer standpoint, yeah, I actually think that's one of the most interesting pieces of all of this. So the way we recruited our farmers were, the advantage of being owned by Post Holdings is, you can imagine, Post cereal with honey bunches of oats. I don't even know how many millions of pounds of grain we buy every year, but that actually was a really important piece of our success, because one, it enabled us to find really forward-leaning farmers, and two, it enabled us to lean in on the risk, because we weren't quite sure if this was going to work. And if we couldn't get ourselves to carbon negative, we always had the safety valve of saying, like, oh, okay, we'll just send those oats over to honey bunches of oats. So that's kind of where we started. Now there's and we pay a premium to our farmers, to be clear. So we are rewarding the farmers for the practices that they're taking here. I think we're going to see some pretty dramatic shifts in regenerative or carbon farming practices. All the big players in the space, both from the food manufacturing side as well as the retailer side of things, have put out very big goals to have big percentages of US farms transitioned over to regenerative practices like no-till and cover cropping over the next 10, 20 years. So I think from a farmer standpoint, there's becoming enough data where you're starting to see it like, oh, okay, this actually is lowering the risk profile. We got a lot of data that shows that your yields are still going to hold, that your soil actually becomes more robust and more resistant to, unfortunately, the effects of climate change that are out there today, more biodiversity. So there's a ton of data now. So I think you're gonna see a lot more farmers shifting over very quickly, because the market's gonna demand it. And like, we're pulling the risk out. There's a lot more that goes into that I won't even pretend like I know when I get into, like crop insurance and all that. But there's a lot of forces that are fundamentally going to be pushing more and more farmers towards regenerative, because it's the right thing to do both for the farmer and for the future. Your other question about beach balls is an interesting one. Yeah, we actually, funny enough, we don't sell any beach balls. We were trying to come up with just a way to visualize it, but I chuckle a little bit because I hope everybody's coming to the St. Louis Earth Day Festival. We'll be there, and you will actually see a 25-foot arch made out of beach balls, but know that we are recycling all that plastic.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? So I have one final question for you. You mentioned that you're buying the future, I think, for if you're saying, I'm trying to exactly remember the way that you put it, but basically you're saying you're buying the future. So when you have those oats, or when you have those like Airly crackers, you're basically, we're not buying it after you purchase it. So like your credits, I think is what you were referring to. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, all the oats that are in the box, as well as the other agricultural and forestry projects we've invested in, we've already done that. So by the time you pick up the box, you've already removed it from the air.
Got it. Well, we are at time, if you can believe it or not. 30 minutes goes by so fast. I really appreciate you being here, Jen, and joining us for our coffee break. I want to also just remind everybody to register for our next event, our evening program, which is Resilient Waterways, Watersheds, and Their Cities. So that'll be our evening program. And it'll be exciting because it will talk about the Mississippi River, right? So it's great. The link is below in the chat. And thank you, Jen, so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, guys.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I
Thanks,
guess
Jen.
we'll see you
That was
at
great.
the Earth Day Festival.
Yeah, please stop by our booth and please buy us
Yeah.
some shirts. Yeah.
So exciting. Bye. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.